Hello, welcome back. This is Dr. Burton, and we're continuing in our discussion about critical theory. I just wanted to bring up a couple of points to remember about context of this conversation. First, I'm a philosophy teacher, and I am addressing concerns originally raised by my students in my online logic class this summer. So that's the first context. I'm a teacher. I'm addressing the topic with a concern for my students to learn to think critically about critical theory. So if you disagree with me, that's fine, as long as you think critically and do your own research. Okay, I don't know everything about this topic, and a lot of it I'm learning as we go. So I have done deep studies in the history of philosophy, so that part's not new. But the contemporary cultural applications sometimes surprise me. So I admit I'm learning with you, but I can show you how to think about it. Okay, so the next context to remember, particularly my logic class, is that there is a purpose to the class we're in, and it is to gain confidence and competence in the use of reason to find meaning and to settle disputes. Okay, so finding meaning is like, what does that mean? Can you define your terms? Can we come to an understanding together? And settling disputes is a means whereby we could name the problem and the root of the problem and try to address the problem. And so critical theory and its applications in culture happens to be something under dispute, and so we're using this as an occasion to address it. One more thing is I'm out here making videos for online teaching, and so my set, and yeah, it is what it is. I don't have a better place to make videos, so I don't mean to be boring with the books behind me, but that's what I have. That's what I have. All right. Something else I want you to think about is I personally have concerns about critical theory, and I'm learning to evaluate what I'm hearing every day. Some of the things are new to me, like perhaps the leprechaun and the word fighting in Fighting Irish could be offensive, and we might have to change Notre Dame's mascot. That's new. But okay, we'll roll with it. Another thing I want you to keep in mind is I am looking at a worldview, a whole worldview. Critical theory has theory on it, and we're going to look at that today. What is the theory part? But I have been thinking about a whole worldview. Now, I got some good pushback from my friend Adam, who lives in Sri Lanka and maybe sees things a little bit differently, not being in the United States. And it was on video number 2 when I went over the philosophical assumptions of critical theory. Now, after I made that, I wasn't sure I wanted to call critical theory a worldview or a philosophy, so I'm a little bit, I don't know, nervous about that. But there is a worldview that undergirds critical theory that we can identify, and I think I have been identifying it. I didn't get pushback about that. But I do want to say there's a world in life view. I feel comfortable calling it a post-Nietzschean philosophy. But I thought today we could look at Adam's critique and go through some of these points because he makes some really good points that I would like to address publicly. All right, so first he says, now I like this, he said I did a pretty fair job, at least to the end. And he says, I don't think we can say that critical theory has displaced analytic philosophy in the academy just yet. The vast majority of elite programs in the Anglophone world are still analytic, and most of the continental programs are Catholic. I think critical theory is big in other departments, but in philosophy it's still well behind. Yeah, Adam, I'm going to have to, I don't know, object. I do think analytic philosophy is still big in the elite universities, but I don't think it is viewed by others in the university as relevant. And insofar as analytic philosophy has been wed to science, and now science is under critique, I just don't think it's going to fare well. And I have heard critical theory critiques of analytic philosophy going all the way back to the Frankfurt School, original Frankfurt School. Now, I'm getting my opinions about the end of analytic philosophy from this book, Philosophy in the Mirror of Nature by Richard Rorty. Also, Cornel West has done some work on the end of, or post-analytic philosophy. So maybe people are still doing it, but I'm not sure how relevant it is for philosophy as a discipline. But I'm willing to go back and forth on that one. It's not a hill I'm wanting to die on. It's just something I'm observing, and I think there's going to be a change in how we do philosophy in the academy. I think there has to be. Okay, second objection or pushback or whatever we want to call it, critique. I don't really understand a lot of the antipathy toward critical theory, qua critical theory, that is coming from the USA. I view it primarily as a tool, a methodology, rather than as a systematic philosophy. Okay, let's address that. I agree, Adam. At first, I saw critical theory as a methodology of the social sciences, and I think that's probably what critical theory was for the Frankfurt School and what it is in the social sciences, but it has a program for social change and changing values in culture. And in that sense, if it's going to achieve that goal, it does have to have some kind of philosophical foundation. So that's why I'm looking at it systematically. And yes, look at the next point he makes here. As far as a systematic philosophy goes, and as you well know, that's been out of vogue for quite a while. So true. Critical theory itself says we don't do grand narratives, we don't do systems of philosophy, and yet it can't escape becoming a system itself. And yes, they will say we don't do metaphysics, and I don't know, maybe perhaps they don't even talk about the good life, but what is liberation if not some vision of the good life? So I don't think they can escape it, even though everyone says, oh, we're post-foundationalist and we're post-metaphysics. We just say that, and it's very dishonest to say you're not doing metaphysics and then you really assume materialism, because that's what I would say all of the critical theorists that I've studied assume. Okay, but that's me just ranting. Even then, if we take an absolutely systematic and critical theory like Marxism, it doesn't stop us from using insights from that theory in practical political matters without buying into the entire system. Okay, this is where I do agree. I do agree with Adam here. There may be parts to a system that are true. I think that's why they're attractive. Systems, I mean, who would adopt a system that is evidently and wholly false? Nobody. I think that's why critical theory is attractive, because there are some deep truths in critical theory. So he's mentioning Marxism. So yeah, Marxism does pretty much offer a complete system. And then practical political matters. So yes, we can probably use critical theory as a tool for looking at some practical political matters, but I would say it's because critical theory says some true things. But I also want to suggest that if those things are true, then we can say them without having to buy into critical theory as a system. Maybe those true things make more sense in a more realistic system of truth. I'll just say it that way. Okay, now this part I have to take issue with. In the same way, I don't find your presuppositional apologetics very convincing. Pause. Okay, I do not subscribe to presuppositional apologetics. When I hear that, I think of Van Tillianism, and I don't subscribe to presuppositional apologetics. If I'm doing apologetics at all, it's classical apologetics. I actually prefer not to do apologetics publicly. I prefer to do philosophy publicly, and I think there is a distinction. And when I do philosophy, I do rational presuppositionalism, which is different. Remember in video 3, we talked about common ground, and one of the pieces of common ground was rational presuppositionalism, where we're talking about racism way up here and we're disagreeing about racism up here. It's because we have disagreements down here at the more basic level. So rational presuppositionalism is a method for getting to more basic assumptions from less basic assumptions. It's a way of stepping back and seeing where the disagreement really lies. Okay, so presuppositional apologetics is way different than rational presuppositionalism as a method for dealing with more basic questions prior to less basic questions. But okay, now Adam goes on to say, I do really find some of your insights that are derived from that apologetic to be useful. So I'm guessing he's saying that maybe some of the things I say are true, even though he doesn't subscribe to my system. That's fine, yeah. In this sense, even if we absolutely disagree with some of the implicit or explicit presuppositions we believe underlie critical theory, I still find critical theory to be incredibly useful in its stated aim, namely unmasking hidden mechanisms of oppression that exist in our societies. At this point, I completely agree with Adam. Critical theory is good at unmasking. In fact, I was using critical theory to unmask critical theory. I do think it's a helpful tool, and it's probably part of critical thinking. It's probably what we do when we point out assumptions, and not just assumptions, but assumptions that harm people in the form of oppression. But again, I would want to back up and say, okay, hidden mechanisms of oppression may be something that people are disagreeing about in society today. Like, what is that? What does that mean? And again, that's where we use the presuppositional method to back up and say, you use this word oppression. What does that mean? And are we using the word oppression from, let's say, the critical theory worldview, or from a Christian worldview, or some other modern secular worldview that hasn't undergone the postmodern turn yet? So even here, I agree that critical theory can do these things by showing us where oppression is, but I also think what counts as oppression is something we need to think about. Okay, so thank you, Adam, for helping me to think about those things. Okay, so remember, he's in Sri Lanka. As you may know, in this part of the world, including countries I teach in, Christians are often subjected to horrible oppression. There is even a type of intersectionality at work in this oppression too, in which Orthodox and Catholic Christians get the stick less than mainline Protestants, and evangelicals get the worst treatment of all. Okay. Yet, ideologically, even in the Islamic states here, freedom of religion is explicitly enshrined in law. Nevertheless, Christians are systematically oppressed through societal and political mechanisms that lie just below the surface that limit the jobs they can take, the places they can live or build churches, etc. And this same critical approach can be applied to linguistic, caste, and sex discrimination just as effectively. This makes critical theory extremely useful here in unmasking these systems of oppression and answering arguments from opponents that appeal to the ostensible freedom of religion or other liberal protections that are enshrined in the Constitution of these states. Adam makes an excellent point here. There may be different kinds of intersecting points of privilege and oppression that we should pay attention to, and we can thank critical theory for showing us this reality and raising questions about how we're going to address this reality. So yes, and I think I wanted to show this because I know a lot of Christians are objecting to critical theory, and I want you to see this is a way to think about critical theory as applying to Christians. And we can say, okay, maybe this example from Sri Lanka helps us to understand oppression a little bit better and intersectionality a little bit better. And yet we can use those insights from critical theory without buying the entire world and life view. Okay, there may be more to say about this as we go on, but I'm going to move on. Okay, this is an interesting point Adam makes next. Given all of that, I think that most of the antipathy I'm seeing in America towards critical theory is, one, more political than philosophical in its orientation. Pause, let's think about that. That is probably true. I don't know that you can do political without philosophical. I will say political is downstream of culture, and culture is downstream of philosophy, so they're intimately tied. You can't get rid of it, but in the United States, we don't talk about the philosophical. That's why I might seem like an oddball raising these questions. But it is very tied up with the political right now, and we are in the midst of a political crisis. Now, maybe that very reality, a political crisis in a pandemic with the George Floyd murder, is highlighting questions of authority, and critical theory has raised a lot of questions about authority. I think that's what I'm going to talk about in my next video, critical theory and authority. So the political is definitely amplifying the conversation in the United States right now. Two, all right, I'm seeing in America towards critical theory is maybe better directed towards certain forms of critical theory or certain tenets of a particular branch of critical theory. For example, what do we mean in critical race theory when we say that racism is endemic in America? Does the conceptual framework of white supremacy apply only in white majority countries or worldwide? Okay, so that's a second issue he's seeing in America. Okay, I don't really have much to add to that. I think, yeah, maybe there are different branches of critical theory, different applications of critical theory being used in the United States, and they may or may not be applied elsewhere. I think as we continue the discussion, we will be able to make those kinds of distinctions. So I'm going to leave number 2 out there for right now. And then he says, basically don't write off critical theory, the whole thing. And I agree. I like to look at theories, philosophies, systems, and look for the parts that are true and see, I think my own worldview is true. Otherwise, I wouldn't hold it. And so when I see critical theory giving me this interpretation, I ask myself, is that interpretation better, or is mine, is that conceptual piece better in my worldview and interpreted from the perspective that I hold? So when I hear things like racism, I ask myself, what does that mean? What do I think it means? And then what does critical theory think it means? And are we close? And which one better fits reality? Now, there's the problem. Critical theory is going to be, at root, unable to talk about reality. So that, I think, is going to be a problem. That may be where we have to say, I disagree fundamentally with your assumptions about how we know things and what reality is like. But we first need to be able to identify those assumptions to be able to disagree with them. All right, so we're not going to write off critical theory as a whole. We're just going to think critically about it before we adopt it as a whole. Okay, point 3. From my first 2 main points above, I would argue that our approach shouldn't be anti-critical theory per se. Agree, I am not anti-critical theory. I may be anti-materialism anti-post-Nietzschean philosophy, okay, I am, admittedly, and where I see critical theory riding on that, then I am anti that philosophy. But that instead we should endeavor to use the true insights found in critical theory in order to advance our own philosophical projects wherever possible. Agree. Of course, there are a lot of areas where critical theory is utterly useless to me. For example, metaphysics or philosophy of religion. Yes, that's my point exactly. The big pieces that undergird it can't be adopted without argument. How about that? And I don't use it. I don't either, Adam. But where it is undoubtedly useful and points towards the truth about systems of oppression in areas like social and political philosophy, I see no reason to toss it aside. Okay, I may be willing to agree there. I say maybe because I think what I've learned from critical theory is that they have definitely exposed serious problems in society, and I may be able to use the conceptual categories from critical theory and maybe even a methodology of like the genealogy. I like that approach sometimes, but I don't want to personally right now go much further with what I will adopt without thinking more about it. I worry that if we dismiss critical theory out of hand, we are acting like reactionaries and philosophical dilettantes, Jordan Peterson and the like, rather than serious philosophers. Adam, I fully agree with you. I would not want to toss it out. I am going to look at it historically, conceptually, take it seriously, because it does need to be taken seriously. It's the most popular philosophy of our day. It's attractive to young people. It's attractive to my students. If I maybe if I were younger, it would be attractive to me too. I don't know. But I do think you're right. We cannot be reactionaries. We can't just call everyone a socialist or a Marxist and, do away with it. We have to look at it, critically analyze it, think about it, and I need you all to do that for yourself too. I mean, I'm just a philosophy teacher out here making videos. You need to learn to think things through, and hopefully I'm giving you some conceptual categories about how to do that. So thank you, Adam, for this nice critique and opportunity to respond. I'm very glad that we have this kind of philosophical relationship, even though it's at a distance. And I hope that we could use this as a way to show others how philosophical conversation can and should go. So thank you all for joining us. And next time, I hope to talk about authority, the question of authority. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.